Good evening, everybody. This is Andy Campbell of Baltimore City Public Schools. For this assignment of the course for AD 650 at Loyola University, we have been talking about the idea of the Null curriculum. And the purpose of this presentation is to, number one, discuss what the Null curriculum is. Number two, give some examples of where we might see the Null curriculum in general practice. And then number three, how that specifically manifests at my school. So to get us started, we've talked about three different types of curriculums thus far. The explicit curriculum, the implicit curriculum or hidden curriculum, and then the null curriculum. So one person that comes to mind in this situation is Elliot Eisner. The idea of null curriculum, I don't want to say that it was founded by him. I'd have to do a little bit more research on that idea, but he would be considered the guru of this idea of null curriculum. So just to give a little bit of background, the explicit curriculum, that's basically what we're teaching in class. These are the subjects that are going to be taught, the knowledge and skills that schools expect successful students to acquire. So in other words, this is the Eureka Math curriculum that my school district delivers to elementary. Wit and Wisdom is the official English and Language Arts curriculum. And within that, it is aligned to the Common Core State Standards, which is what students will ultimately be assessed on to determine whether or not they have understood the explicit curriculum. Now, we talked about the idea of the hidden curriculum. Eisner labels this as the implicit curriculum. These are lessons that arise from the culture of the school and behaviors, attitudes, and expectations that characterize that culture. These are things that we don't directly teach. It's not part of Eureka Math. However, we indirectly expose our students to these ideas of norms and values and procedures that we put into place. Just two examples here that I have. The first one, of course, is PBIS. I'm not going to go into exactly what PBIS is, but for those of you that are familiar with it, the purpose is to support positive behaviors. Now, it is not. It might seem like it's a formalized curriculum, but there's nothing in it that's taught. There's no assessment limits or anything such as that. It's more of norms, values, and the expectations. The second example here is specific to my school. At Cecil Elementary, we have the acronym PROUD. These are the expectations that we have of our students: prepare our mind and bodies, respect others. I'm not going to go into the entire thing, but it is not, while it is labeled and it is in some ways taught to the students, it falls into the hidden curriculum because it is those expectations that we're modeling, that we are encouraging our students to be a part of. So finally, this is what the focus is on. We're talking about the null curriculum. The Eisner released this third edition, Educational Imagination on the Design and Evaluation of School Programs. In his initial publication, which was 1985, he discusses the idea of the null curriculum. And the authors in which I'm going to get into in a minute, Thornton, along with Flinders and others, they but they frequently reference Eisner in their definitions as well. So I thought it would be good to go directly to the source. Eisner describes the null curriculum as the options that students are not afforded, concepts and skills that are not a part of their intellectual repertoire. In other words, these are things, we'll talk about some specific examples. These are things that students are not taught. They're not given the opportunity to explore, or it is just eliminated. Well, again, we'll talk about some examples. I thought a pretty prescient quote from Eisner was that what schools do not teach may be important as what they do teach. So it really draws parallels to the importance of the null curriculum, as we're so focused on the idea of the standard explicit curriculum, the formal academics, that some of the skills contained within the null curriculum get pushed by the wayside, but in many ways they are paramount to the development of the student and can have a direct impact on that explicit curriculum. So we talked about the authors, Flinders along with others. These authors focused heavily on Eisner's theories. They describe the Null curriculum as things that students do not learn or have an opportunity to experience. So in other words, they would see a lack of alternatives or perspectives. Just as an example, perhaps with the focus on media today, we might see media bias. Giving one side of a story, whereas the other side is left out. That is just as important that we see both sides to the story. Flinders and others also focused on 3 dimensions of Null curriculum. The first is the intellectual processes, logical analysis, deductive reasoning. I think this is very important, the critical thinking aspect. We're so focused on what we want our students to do and what the end goal is. How are they going to demonstrate a mastery of the standard? We're not teaching them the how to think. We're not giving them that critical thinking. We're giving them a set of skills, but we're not teaching them what to do with it. Okay. The second dimension of the Null curriculum, as described by Flinders and others, was the subject matter. This is more of the exclusionary hierarchy of content. We all know that I can't speak on behalf of other districts, but at least in mine, math, science, and ELA, they take precedent. Why? Because they're tested, and at the end of the day, our schools are in many ways graded on how well students do on those tests. They're not necessarily any more important content areas than others, things like social studies, law, psychology, even things that may be considered old-fashioned, like home economics. They, a lot of times, are just not simply taught, even though it is crucial to the development of our students. The third dimension described was the affect, and this is similar to the idea of the hidden curriculum. These are the things, the values, attitudes, and emotions that students are a part of. We're not directly teaching them, and in some cases, we just completely leave it out. Some schools have gone so far, and there's been quite a discussion as to whether or not schools should even touch upon the idea of morals and values. The second discussion point came from Thornton. This was a very specific example talking about exclusion from curriculum. The idea of the exclusion of LGBTQ has been bantered about now for quite some time. As the civil rights movement has occurred, there's been a much more inclusionary practice of different cultures, different races, but for some reason, a lot of these ideas of the lesbian, gay, and transgender community has been left out. I thought that this was a pretty good point here by Thornton, that the common failure to even mention the existence of lesbians and gay men, let alone bisexual and transgender persons, clearly clashes with gay matters today being a visible part of the public landscape of America. In other words, society is exclusionary, and it's falling and coming into our schools in such a way that teachers and administrators, they're ignoring teaching some of this for a multitude of reasons. It is can be a touchy subject. Some people have biases that are brought out by this, and of course some families do have some issues with this being brought up. However, I thought one thing that Thornton touched upon that was crucial was the idea of teachers having autonomy over the Null curriculum. The quote was, "All teachers are curricular instructional gatekeepers. They largely decide the day-to-day curriculum and activities students experience." In our previous assignment with the hidden curriculum, we were tasked with determining whether or not teachers do in fact have autonomy over the hidden curriculum. Thornton here suggests that teachers in fact have authority over the Null curriculum as well. So now that we've gotten the perspectives of Thornton and Flinders and others, these are just some examples. We've briefly touched upon a few of them, but here's a few more. The idea of the exclusion of the visual and performing arts. Unfortunately, I know this is the case in Baltimore City due to either funding or because of the prioritization of these tested skills. They're not a part of the Common Core. A lot of these are pushed by the wayside. The next two, health, social, emotional well-being, along with digital citizenship, have really come into the forefront over the past year simply because of the advent of virtual learning due to COVID. We are pushing the ideas of mindfulness, but previously a lot of this was not directly taught. We expect our students to be calm when the time comes for that. We expect them to follow these expectations. We expect them to display appropriate online, use an appropriate online presence, but it's not necessarily taught as part of the Null curriculum. One good example of the perspectives idea was social studies. Growing up, I know that we would celebrate Columbus Day and think, oh, this is a wonderful thing. Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But what was not taught was the enslavement of the indigenous peoples, the torture, the brutal murders that occurred during the colonization of from Europe into the Americas. And finally, the example that can be used with science, opting not to teach Darwin's theory of evolution. Again, exclusion for specific reasons. So just as I want to offer two examples of how, in my practice at Cecil Elementary, part of Baltimore City Public Schools, the Null curriculum is manifested. So I'm going to give the first example, and I'm going to connect it to the explicit curriculum. In fourth grade, we covered the idea in Module 6 of Eureka Math of decimals. The main ideas were to have students connect their understanding of fractions to decimals, be able to read, write, and represent decimals. We got into basic computation, and eventually we made the connection to money. Now, it got me thinking, well, we're teaching them how to add and subtract decimal money, but there's a lot of things that go along with money that are part of the Null curriculum that we're not teaching. Such an example as how do we have money, but how do we appropriately budget our money? Again, it's a crucial life skill that we're not teaching our students. Things like balancing or budgeting within a bank account or using a checkbook. We're teaching them how to add and subtract money, but we're not teaching them these skills. One thing that's very important nowadays is the idea of tangible currency, cash, versus the idea of virtual banking or something like Venmo, transferring money or Apple Pay to one another. We're teaching students how to use decimals, but we're not teaching them the skills that go along with it. We're teaching them the what, but we're not teaching them the how. And finally, the idea of credit cards goes along again with the Null curriculum. Second example of how I noticed the Null curriculum manifesting at school was with the fourth module of the Wit and Wisdom, our explicit standard academic curriculum. We have a unit on Greek mythology. Within the curriculum, Wit and Wisdom has students reading and responding in a written form to just various prompts that are based on Greek mythology. It focuses on increasing reading fluency and analysis of selected Greek myths using text-dependent evidence. Now, it was a good unit. However, there are still things that we should examine that are not taught or excluded as part of the Null curriculum. First example, what impact might these Greek myths have on as part of modern culture? A lot of this is embedded within our current culture, but we're not really making that connection. I know that might be a little bit of a stretch for fourth graders, but nonetheless, it isn't touched upon. Neglecting some of the additional myths. There were a lot of Greek myths. I understand there's only so many hours in the day, but not all of them were covered. One thing was another part of the Null curriculum was the neglecting the exploration of other cultures and belief systems. So we're not talking about Roman beliefs. We're not talking about Native American belief systems and cultures. And finally, just in some instances, the content may be a bit sensitive due to personal family beliefs, religious beliefs, that people might want that to be excluded as part of the Null curriculum. So that was just a brief overview of what the Null curriculum is, some examples of it, and how it is manifested in my personal practice. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.